Hi there, everyone. Welcome to our Brazilian Grand Prix debrief. Been waiting for this. There's so much to talk about after that race. You kind of blinked and you missed the Grand Prix. There was so much action. But here we are. It's relatively late in London town, but I hope where you are, A, it's not too late if you're in England, and B, or the UK, and B, wherever you are in the world, that kind of fits in with your schedule. Different time slots, so it'll be interesting to see what you all think about that. Wow, so much going on, wasn't there? I mean, as I said in the YouTube video yesterday, it's hard to get away from the emotion of a guy like George Russell winning his first Grand Prix and what that feels like for him, what it means for him. It means for any driver when they won their first race. But he won it in style, didn't he? I mean, to head a Mercedes 1-2, Lewis Hamilton in the other car. How did he beat Lewis? He beat Lewis because he did a better job in qualifying. That's what it came down to. And that was in a difficult qualifying session. Classic Brazil, a little bit wet, clouds overhead, and George went out and did the lap. And Lewis was a little bit off. And then George went off, but it didn't matter because he'd done the lap. And the Mercedes boys and girls did a great job preparing the car for the next day. And out of the box, George was just so quick in FP2 with his long runs. And then, of course, he won the sprint race. And then he was on the pole. Well, he started P1. The honour of the pole still goes to K-Mac. He started P1, perfect start. Lewis couldn't get near him into turn one. And so there were no issues after that, really, except when they bunched the field together right at the end behind the safety car. And then George, of course, got on the radio. Are we racing? Are we not? What's going to happen? Yeah, we're racing, George. Just stay cool. And he did. Great restart. I mean, Lewis is good at those restarts. And that turn one in Brazil invites some sort of attempt at a restart time. But George did it. Set fastest lap as well at that time of the race. And won it. Won his first Grand Prix. So that's something that will always be with us in 2022. All the other great results that Red Bull and Max Verstappen have put in, and Mercedes fight, and Ferrari's wins periodically, they're all there. They're all part of the fabric of 2022. But this win in Brazil, in a country that's absolutely full of Formula One emotion, isn't it? When you think about everything that's happened in Brazil ever since the days of Emerson Fittipaldi, ever since 71 when he came into Formula One. And for George to do it there, very fitting, I think. It's where Jensen clinched his world championship too, I think, wasn't it? Yeah, wow. And then, of course, on the other side of the coin, we've got the whole Red Bull drama. And I know that's what a lot of you probably will want to talk about. And I think I want to talk about it a bit more because I'm hoping that as we progress tonight, it's nighttime here, that I will begin to get some understanding of what Max was on about and what drove him to do that. But at the moment, I'm still groping. I've got to say, I'm still groping to understand what he was thinking. This is a guy who's just won his second world championship. He's won it, absolutely blitzed the championship. He's got to be the happiest man on the planet Earth, possibly in the cosmos. And he goes and does that. Maybe there was some grudge. Maybe there was some vindictive thing there. But why? Why at this point of the year when everything is totally cool and chilled? He's got life at his fingertips. Why would he do that? It's just the most bizarre thing. So I'm interested to hear what you all think, actually, because, it defies logic, really, I think. And the first out of the box, insofar as what we've just been talking about, is Roger Bilko. Great name. Any relation to Sergeant Bilko, I wonder? I only ask that because A, I'm a Sergeant Bilko fan, and B, because as probably you all know, not only did James Hunt wear slightly provocative T-shirts under his flameproof overalls, as distinct from flameproof underwear, but he also regularly wore a Sergeant Bilko T-shirt as well, as he would, Anyway, Roger Bilko says, we know that Formula One drivers have to be selfish to succeed, but has not Max raised that particular bar by not gifting Checo the 2 points he may need to secure second in the Drivers' Championship? Good question. I mean, that is the question that's on all our minds, I think. And I think he's completely, I'm just having a look, see how we can work it. I'm positioning the questions slightly differently from last time, as you can see. So that's all right, isn't it? If I sit there, that kind of works, I think. Some of the questions will be shorter, of course, so take that into account as well. That's about balance, isn't it? Yeah, about that. It is extraordinary to me, everybody's different. Every human being on this planet Earth is different, and everybody who supports and watches Formula One and is enthusiastic about Formula One is different. We all have our different ways of thinking, our different backgrounds, our different knowledge, our different skill sets, if you like. In my case, I've been around a long time. I've known a lot of drivers, and I've seen a lot of world champions perform and race and drive, and I've never ever seen anything like this at this stage of a world champion's career in a season. I've never seen anything like it. I mean, I don't know what to say, really. I mean, is it if you put this in the context of Peter Collins, 1954 Italian Grand Prix, with a chance of winning the world championship himself, getting out of his Ferrari and giving his car to Juan Manuel Fangio, purely because of his respect for Fangio. I know that, but those were old times, and I know that you could say, a long time ago. But he was a real person, Peter Collins. He was a real racing driver. He was a racer. He wanted to win. But he also had this thing of respect, and he had this thing of feeling that he was part of a bigger thing. He wasn't just racing for Peter Collins. And that's what I think we saw with the Max thing. We just saw Max being completely selfish over something that he's now suggesting is some sort of incident, and he had to redress the balance, wipe the slate clean, and then everything would be carrying on as normal. And of course I'll help my mate Sergio in Abu Dhabi, but we had to do this in Brazil to get to that point. I mean, what are we talking about here? We're talking about some sort of, I don't know, words fail me, actually. I mean, let's have a look at how this is what he actually said in the official Red Bull press release after the race. He said, we've discussed internally as a team the matter between Checo and myself and have moved on as a team. Oh, well, that's good to know. If he needs the help, and there is a chance to help him in Abu Dhabi, then I will be there, and I'll of course support him. We're fighting for first and second in the Drivers' Championship, so we'll work hard to achieve that. Well, the damage is done, mate. It's not, Brazil never happened, let's move on, which is a classic sort of human 2022 human response to a lot of dramas in the world today. But that happened. But let's move on. Let's change things. I mean, it's a little bit what happened after Abu Dhabi last year. It was a complete mess, and they totally broke the sporting regulations. But let's move on. Let's just make sure it doesn't happen again. And, it's the same thing here. But I'm sorry, it did happen, and it moved not only Sergio Perez to say after the race, well, now we know who this guy really is, but it also moved Christian Horner to say, I'm absolutely livid about this. And I think that's another subject we need to get onto, because it comes under the heading of potentially poor management. Because why wasn't he on top? If there was some incredible grudge going on there, why wasn't he on top of that? Why wasn't that solved long before we got to Brazil in this situation? And isn't that what good driver management is all about? So that's another subject. But even putting that to one side, and let's assume that, and giving Christian the benefit of the doubt here, that he was never told and knew nothing about Max's feelings, the fact remains that Max had this grudge, and that is the most astonishing thing for me. For a guy that's won his second world championship, and this time won it in style, with record-breaking results, with, as I said in the YouTube video, the perfect driver in the other car. You couldn't find a better number two than Sergio Perez. He's better than Valtteri Bottas because he's a bit quicker, I think. And he never, ever gives Max a hard time when Max is on it, because Max is quicker. And so he's therefore the perfect guy. And he does obviously a lot of work behind the scenes back at the factory. So he is the sort of number two driver that Lewis Hamilton would have loved to have had at Mercedes, that Charles Leclerc would have loved to have had at Ferrari. Or George, if he's on his own, if Lewis retires. He's the sort of guy that George would love to have in the other car. Any really quick racing driver would love to have Sergio Perez in the other car. And here's Max tearing that relationship apart. It's absolutely crass. I just find it, I'm absolutely lost for words. So, yeah, Bilko, I totally agree with you. Now listen, before we go any further, somebody said there was a key thing at the bottom of this chat to stop me having to scroll like this, but there isn't the cog wheel at the end of this one, so sadly that isn't going to happen. We got Matadamsink, yeah. Hello from New York City. Well, it's good time zone for you. Hello, New York City. Hi, Matt. Nice to have you on board. Thank you very much. The Suspicious Pixel. Evening, Peter. Great race. Disappointed in Max, but I hope Sergio moves on and concentrates on improving in 2023. Well, yeah. I'm just going to see how that sits on the screen now. Yeah, it looks all right, isn't it? Yeah, let's hope that happens. I mean, from Max's point of view, actually, if you think about it, the last thing he wants is Sergio improving. He just wants Sergio staying exactly as he is, because as I say, he's the perfect number 2. He wins races when Max hasn't got it quite right or has a drama. He does the job back at Milton Keynes, and he picks up a lot of points to help Red Bull in the Constructors' Championship. Is there anyone better? The last thing Max wants, actually, is Sergio being any better or any quicker. But you're right, Suspicious Pixel. You're absolutely right. As a result of this, Max might think, right, all bets are off now. I ain't driving for this guy anymore other than just to do what I can do for Sergio Perez. I'll be nice to him and I'll go through all the motions. And, of course, I wouldn't mind a bit of help in Abu Dhabi. But the reality is I'm just going to drive for Sergio Perez now. Isn't that what he would be thinking? And if that's the case, Max has blown it because he had this perfectly compliant driver in the other car. And it's all very well to say, oh, well, it's all over now and I'll help Sergio. Of course, Sergio is going to take any help that Max gives him at any point. Why wouldn't he? But it doesn't mean to say Max is getting any help in return now. That's the issue. And that's something that Christian Horner needs to get on top of. And he wasn't able to get on top of that with Mark Webber and Sebastian Vettel. And I don't think he will here. It's slightly different because Webber and Vettel were closer in terms of pace and ability to do the job on any given day than Max and Sergio Perez. So in theory, it's an easier balance. Well, it's a great balance in terms of the team. But now that Sergio's been kicked in the stomach like this, it's a very difficult problem to solve because it doesn't matter what they say to the drivers. Ultimately, it's going to come down to what they're doing on the day, in the moment, on the racetrack. And I don't know. I'm only imagining now, but if we get to 2023 and we got an incredibly quick Red Bull again, and for whatever reason Sergio Perez is leading the Grand Prix, but his tyres are maybe 4 laps older than Max's, and there are 5 laps to go, and Max has been catching him, is Sergio going to? If they say to Sergio, Max has got Ferraris 5 seconds behind, you need to let Max go. Is he going to let him go? I very much doubt it. That's the thing. And, for a change in tone, and I suspect there may well be some people saying, Windsor, you're completely wrong. Max was totally justified in doing what he's doing. I'm going to preempt you there because I've got a mate who is a massive Max fan. And I sent him an email after the race saying, what is Max on? What was he doing? And he said, this is his response. It was a worthless 2 points. Max had a horrendous day and deserves what he can get. I don't know why anyone would be mad at that. It's for second in the championship, and he's going to get it anyway. Plus, it looks better for Max if Perez doesn't finish second. Well, I suppose there is that argument. The question to ask is, would Max have given Perez the win in Mexico if he was in second and they were both safe from the opposition? And I think he would have done that, yes. Okay, if that's the case, what's happened between Mexico and Brazil to change everything? This was 2 points. It's a non-story, he says. Well, I don't think it is. It's nothing to do with the points. It's to do with the disrespect because Sergio did exactly what he was supposed to do and let Max pass because he was on soft tyres. And then the deal was if Max couldn't get past Fernando Alonso within sight of the finish, then he would give the position back to Checo. And we've seen that in Formula One on many occasions over the last 10 years at least. That is standard procedure these days in that situation. And yet when it came to giving the place back to Checo, he said, no, I'm not doing it. Well, he didn't say anything. He just didn't do it. Moving Red Bull, this is the important point, moving Red Bull to say, what happened, Max? So they obviously had absolutely no idea. And yet here's Max saying after the race, I've made my position very clear. Everybody knew exactly how I felt. Well, they obviously didn't, because why were they on the radio saying, what happened, Max? They obviously had no clue, Max. And so, the plot thickens, doesn't it? It doesn't actually get any easier, this. It gets worse and worse and worse in trying to understand what happened. This is from WAF 786. That's a nice name. Makes me think of my mum. She was in the WAF, Women's Air Force. 101 in 4 days' time. November the 18th, she's going to be 101 years old. And that falls between FP1 and FP2 in Abu Dhabi. So I'm going to be rushing over to the care home to give her a bunch of flowers and then rushing back to have a look and see what's going on in FP2. Now, can I be that callous? What would happen if I put out a video saying, sorry, not doing any videos today, my mum's turned 101? I'd probably get quite a lot of views, wouldn't I? Anyway, she's in good form. And she's a massive Max Verstappen fan, so I'm going to have to ask her what she thinks about all this as well. I'm sure she was unimpressed by what happened. And I think she might be becoming a bit of a Checo fan as a result. So Lub Toro is changing the subject a bit, but that's okay, because we all want to know what happened here. And he says, Amos said, I'm a bit lost, that Lewis lost 2/10 due to damage sustained from contact with Max. Yeah, well, we always suspected there was damage on the car, and 2/10 is a lot, isn't it? 2/10 a lap, I assume, not 2/10 over the race distance. Yeah, and I suspect Lando probably had a bit of damage on his car as well. They weren't sure by the end of the race from that shunt with Charles Leclerc. So yeah, no surprise. I mean, Lewis drove incredibly well, but as I said in the piece in the YouTube video, to me, the emotion of watching the emotion of watching George taking off his helmet and mask and looking at the crowd and the sky and realizing he was indeed a Grand Prix winner was very deep. But then I think also Lewis's reaction to it all was amazingly powerful as well. And, that's another thing we've seen from Lewis this year. We've seen this. I mean, I think in the past, everybody sort of said, yeah, Lewis, it's all a bit synthetic, and does he really mean it? And it's all for the show and all the rest of it. And I've never really got involved in those arguments, because I think a lot of that is out of the race car, and so much of that is taken out of context, really, those comments, based on how people see him when he's in an interview and he's a bit annoyed and he's being asked stupid questions, or he doesn't really want to be doing what he's doing at that moment. And we're all in those situations in life. And I guess I've never really thought too much about how sincere Lewis is. It doesn't worry me that much either way when he says, I want to thank the crowd and the team. But what I saw yesterday, I think, was genuinely sincere. I think it was really good. I mean, if you think about it, he was pretty good after Abu Dhabi last year, wasn't he, actually? When you think what Nigel Mansell would have done, and you think what Nigel would have done in this race as well. And other drivers, not only Nigel. And yet Lewis was absolutely dignity personified, I thought, which is no easy feat for somebody in a sport as we heard, right, as Bilko said at the start, where you need to be selfish in order to be very successful. And that's very impressive. So Lub Toro, following that up, is saying, do I wonder if Mercedes have a chance in Abu Dhabi? Well, as I said in the YouTube video, when Carlos Sainz was asked about how he thought Ferrari would go in Abu Dhabi, and he said, Mercedes at the moment have to be the team to beat. I mean, they've been really quick and they're on a roll and all the rest of it. So he's thinking Mercedes are going to be right up there. I think from a Ferrari perspective, you've got to say Mercedes will be right up with Ferrari, if not ahead of them, in Abu Dhabi. And that's been more or less the case since Belgium, hasn't it? That Mercedes have really closed that gap to Ferrari and often gone well beyond the gap. So that's a given. Whether or not they'll be near Red Bull in Abu Dhabi, that is the question. And logic states that on a circuit which is absolutely at sea level, probably even below it in some areas, that they will have more drag on the Merc and they will lose out because of that, and their aero efficiency will suffer because of that. and that's it's all about. There's fewer slow corners as well in the new Abu Dhabi as well, as we saw last year, and we'll get onto that a little bit later because I can go through the latest Pirelli information going into the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. But I think you'd be crazy now to say Lewis doesn't have a chance to win in Abu Dhabi, because it only takes. It's not inconceivable, is it, that we're going to see the two Red Bulls running into one another in Abu Dhabi, and in the manner of Sebastian Vettel and Mark Webber in Turkey or wherever. And it's, if that happens, it's going to be a Merc win. And if that happens, the odds are, I suppose, in terms of George has won a race and there's half a chance it might be Lewis this time. It could well be Lewis Hamilton. So I have to say I'm being a bit pathetic here, because if somebody had said to me 3 weeks ago, can Mercedes win a Grand Prix in the dry in reasonably equal conditions for the end of 22, I would have said no. And there they are, winning in Brazil. And so, on the basis of that, I got to say, half a chance in Abu Dhabi. For sure, half a chance. Just putting the fan up a little bit. I think with this new mic, I can get away with that reasonably efficiently, I think. Possibly not. Probably going to annoy some people. But it is really hot under lights here after a while. So Break is in the show. Thank you very much indeed, Break. Anyone who's a regular on Twitch, please raid Break. A good mate of mine and really good channel he has on Twitch. Does a brilliant job and deserves all the support he gets. So Break, who's a very, very good Formula One engineer as well, so he really knows what he's talking about. Felipe Barreto says hi, Peter, and I say hi. Doctor on the Moon says hi, and Raid is on. Yeah, but there we go. Very good. Payne XD, hi there. How are you today? I'm very well. Actually, it's been a long day. I think, are you interested in my day? But yeah, I've spent the morning catching up on bits and bobs, and then from about mid-morning it was F1 exhibition, global exhibition stuff all day until now, really. And so we're in a really intense period with the global exhibition. Lots going on. I'm actually interviewing Ross Brawn tomorrow, which should be fun. And I think it's going to be announced in Madrid tomorrow as well, on the Spanish launch of the exhibition. I don't know if I'm allowed to be saying all of that, but anyway, here we are. So lots going on with the exhibition at the moment. So this is kind of the bit of the day when I can just get on and relax with you guys and talk about Formula One. And Suspicious Pixel saying hi, Break. Right, so here we go. There's a question to challenge the little grey cells, as Poirot would say. Hello, Peter. Any historical reference of drivers who have acted similarly to Max and how they were impacted afterwards? I remember Clay Regazzoni, 74, I think, US Grand Prix. They gave him a few signals and he didn't, and he ignored them. I suppose the most obvious classic one was Carlos Reutemann in the, would you believe, Brazilian Grand Prix. It was at Rio, though, not in Interlagos, in 81, when there was a clear contract for Carlos in which he had to be number 2 to Alan Jones. And if he was more than, it was quite complicated. It was typical Carlos, didn't have a manager. Well, I was there kind of behind the scenes, but that was it. It was all Carlos. And it was, let me think what it was. It was something like, if Alan is within 6 seconds of Carlos and Alan is more than 12 seconds ahead of the P3 guy, and Carlos is given pit signals to tell him to relinquish position, he had to give the lead to Alan Jones. And it was wet. And Carlos, A, loved the wet, and B, he loved the way Nelson Piquet started on slicks in his home country, convinced that it was going to dry. And Carlos from Argentina seemed to have a better feel. Mind you, he was a farmer, so perhaps he would a better feel for what the weather was going to do, and just couldn't believe that Nelson started on slick. So he just loved those opening laps, just pulling away and disappearing into the distance. But they did get to that point when all those numbers made sense, and Carlos was given the pit signal 2-1, the famous pit signal, and he ignored it and won the race. And afterwards, his argument, and I thought it was quite a good argument, was that he said, "Oh yeah, I just didn't know what the gap was because you never told me, and you didn't give me a chance to try to pull out more than 6 seconds on Alan. And obviously, if I hadn't been able to, and every time I'd gone quicker, Alan had kept the gap exactly the same, I would have let him pass. But because you never gave me the opportunity to pull out maybe a 15-second gap over Alan, and I was just cruising around saving the engine and everything else, I didn't see why I should give him the lead." Of course, Frank and Patrick didn't really want to get involved and kind of washed their hands as quickly as they could, a little bit like Max Verstappen. The team must move on. And so it was settled. But of course, Alan never forgot that, and that was not great for their relationship. And that, I guess, is the most outstanding. I'm sure some others will remember some as well. I mean, Ronnie Peterson, when he was at Lotus alongside Mario, was quite often quicker than Mario, but he was the absolutely perfect. I mean, he did exactly what he was told all the time. And here's another thing for Max to think about, and that is Gilles Villeneuve, the racer's racer. I'm sorry, Max. The racer's racer was Gilles Villeneuve, actually saying to Jody Scheckter before the 79 Italian Grand Prix, "I know I've got a chance to win, Jody, but we shouldn't be racing. You go for it. You take the championship this year, and you help me win it next year." And and Gilles did that. And Gilles, as I say, was the racer's racer. And then we got Max not wanting to give back P6 to Sergio Perez, 2 points when he's won the world championship, and he should be just in La La Land. I mean, I just find the whole thing so sad, actually. So, there's a couple of examples, but I'm sure others will have examples as well in their own history and minds of events like that and what happened. So here's a bit of a, I think this is a bit rich, this point, but we'll put it up anyway. Is Lewis Hamilton finished? Russell is faster. Well, I think it's a bit over the top to say he is faster, period. He's not faster, period. I mean, Lewis has been very quick on occasions this year, and given that Lewis is a 7 times world champion and hasn't been that used to starting in the sort of second, third row of the grid and punching his way through to the front, I think he's driven amazingly well. I've been saying since Abu Dhabi that I'm shocked that Lewis has been able to get this far, let alone seems to be buoyed up for next year now, because of everything that happened. A, Abu Dhabi. B, he wanted to keep Valtteri and they got George. And C, the car was not very good anyway. So there's 3 for a start, 3 huge things that any world champion in the history of the sport would. When Williams signed the driver that Nigel Mansell didn't want at the end of '92, he left the team straight away. When Ferrari's 1980 car was a dog, Jody Scheckter, who won the championship with Ferrari in '79, retired from the sport, and so it goes on. Lots of world champions, given anything that Lewis has had to face, have just walked out of the sport, and here he is, still racing unbelievably aggressively and well, and driving through the field in a car that we now know is 2 tenths off the pace, and giving George a reasonably hard time at the back end of the race after the safety car. So, no, I don't think he's finished at all. You got to say he's not finished. The only thing that would finish him would be if, he lost his he lost his enthusiasm for driving a Formula One car as well as he drives it. That's the only thing that really keeps Lewis going, I think. It's just that he loves that feeling of driving a car, of balancing the dynamic weights and doing it as well as he does. And not thinking too much about what he does, just doing it. And I think he feels completely in harmony with a racing car. He's not the only driver in the world about whom we can say that, but I think Lewis just loves it, and that's what he's always thrived on, and that's what he's always been about, even from the days of karting. So no, I don't think he's finished at all. Pine XD says, what a race. I'm sad Lewis didn't win. Maybe his few lap older tyres and maybe some damage to the floor took the few tenths he needed to overtake George. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And we kind of, we know that now. It was 2 tenths off in terms of damage to the car. No excuse, that was damage that he had with Max Verstappen. I mean, you could argue that perhaps he should have anticipated that Max was not going to give him any room, and there was going to be one of them was going to be damaged in that shunt, and maybe should have read the situation better. You could say if you're reading the Niki Lauda book on how never to run into anybody else and making sure you don't hit anybody is just as important as not being hit by somebody. If you see what I mean, that was Niki's philosophy. But Lewis is a very, very hard racer, and on this occasion they gave the penalty to Max. I'm not convinced because it's a left-right, and Max is on the outside of the left, which puts him on the inside for the right. And if Lewis had backed away at that point, obviously there wouldn't have been a shunt. Equally, if Max hadn't gone down the outside into the left-hander, there wouldn't have been a shunt. So you could say it was a racing accident, but anyway, Max got the penalty on that one. Not that it hurt him in any way, really, but but he did get the damage, and so it was a good drive by Lewis. There's no question about that. So here's another question. This is from Natella Bra, saying, after a few weeks and months, what people will take away is that in this season George won, but Hamilton didn't, and that kills him. Max once again won out on that. Yeah, it's. I did spend a lot of time on that in my YouTube video yesterday, because these are the ironies of Formula One, and it was almost predictable that, as much as Lewis obviously made it clear that he wanted to keep Valtteri Bottas as his teammate, that if they went the George Russell route, we know how quick George is, that inevitably, for whatever reason, George would be the guy, if there was going to be a win, it would go to George. And, let's just call it sod's law, call it irony, call it Clay Regazzoni winning Williams' first Grand Prix instead of Alan Jones. Graham Hill did a lot of the early testing of the Lotus 49, but Jim Clark jumped into the car at Zandvoort 67, had never sat in it, and it was Jim's car that went the distance and Graham's that retired, and Jim won the race. So we have a lot of that. It's as I say, you call it whatever you like. It's but I don't think it's the end of Lewis Hamilton. And as I said, I think all of us should take a little bit more note of how gracious Lewis was and how much dignity he had. And to be like that, you've got to have unbelievable strength of character and grounding, and, if you like, both feet on the ground in a very solid way. I mean, he's very spiritually and emotionally intelligent, Lewis Hamilton, I think, and I think that's what we saw after the race. We saw his emotional. We won't talk about the spiritual side because it's probably a bit too personal, but I think the emotional intelligence of Lewis Hamilton was on display at the end of that race. And there aren't many drivers, in my opinion, in the history of the sport as emotionally intelligent as Lewis Hamilton. So the next one is, and that was from Nutella Brow. Thank you very much, Nutella. MYHIZY. Maisie? Yeah, it probably is. I hope you could talk a bit on the tension Mercedes are in. They've found out how to work this concept. What do you think they're experiencing as they look into 2023? Do they abandon the no pod design, or do they see the fruits of development as a sign to follow in their pod design? Well, yeah, I'm glad you asked that question, because I think a lot of chat has quietened down, hasn't it? There was a lot of chat I don't know, where are we? But let's say post Suzuka, of what are Mercedes going to do? How is it that these guys can't do a car and they're going to have to do a Red Bull type car for next year? Zero pod's never going to work. But of course, they made the decision, I would guess, as to what path they're going to follow around Spa time, just after Spa, and because that's the planning. And as I said at the time, my gut feeling was, and I still may well be wrong, but my gut feeling was that they would continue with this zero pod, because that is the way Mercedes have always worked. They've never, sorry, I've put up the wrong question. Let me just put this one up. They've never chopped and changed with the design. They persevered with it. Admittedly, in the last 7 or 8 years, they've always had a very good car to persevere with, and they've never been in a situation where they haven't had a race-winning car. And I'm talking about the period up to September, and of course it wasn't a race-winning car then. But my view then, and I expressed it then, and I have to stand by it now, is that they would continue with the zero pod, because their process is to develop the car and to evolve that design. And right now, they'd have to be thinking, if they've gone that route, they've indicated. And what they'll be working on over the winter, obviously, is how to keep the same amount of downforce and reduce the drag. That's their process. And in a way, that's an easier problem to solve than out of control porpoising and bouncing, or not having enough downforce. Because you could say, if you're Williams and you've got your Red Bull shaped car and you're super quick in a straight line because you've got no drag, but you also got very little downforce. That's a much more difficult problem to solve, actually how to generate downforce in a way that's efficient. And I think Mercedes, having got to the point they've got to now, and they've got there by getting this car to work at the right ride height, with the right vertical oscillation, and with two drivers who are absolutely on the limit all the time, they don't even give them feedback, like they do give them feedback orally for sure, but it's the numbers that have been guiding the engineers, and every step they've taken has been a correct step because it is a true value of the car. And I make that point because I don't think you can say that about at least 5 of the Grand Prix teams in Formula One. I don't think their drivers are at the level where the engineers know that categorically this is slower or categorically this is quicker than whatever change they put on the car. Because there's always a slight fudge factor of, but what would Max do if he's in this car? Or what would Lewis do? Or George do if he's in this car? But of course you never have to ask that question, do you, if you are at Mercedes? And that's the beauty of having 2 great drivers. But you can achieve that with one great driver, as Red Bull obviously have with Max. And as Mercedes did for many years with Lewis and with Valtteri in another car. So I think they will continue with this car, and it's a definite improvement, isn't it, that we've seen over the second half of the year. I think Ferrari was shocked at how much ground they lost at Spa onwards with the new technical directive when it came into play after the August break. I think Mercedes were delighted at how much ground they were able to pick up with that technical directive, with making everything a bit stiffer and getting the ride height under control within the limits set by the FIA. The only thing, of course, that annoyed both teams was that it didn't hurt Red Bull at all. They imagined and assumed and hoped that Red Bull had a super flexy floor and that would be incredibly punished by the new technical directive. But of course, we now know they didn't. And they weren't punished, and they just continued on their normal way of development, and they continued to build a great race car and found reliability and took weight out of it, more importantly, over the second half of the year. That's another thing Mercedes will be doing over the winter, of course, is saving weight. And that adds up to obviously to traction and acceleration benefits and grip as well. So that's another program they'll be working on, obviously trying to reduce drag and without losing it too much downforce and saving weight in the car. And they're quite capable of doing that. Now they've got a path to follow. They're quite capable of doing that. Roger Bilko says, sorry, he's no relation to Sergeant Ernie Bilko, but he is a fan. So that's good to know. Jay Starship, I'm going to put that up because, I think, he's just agreeing with me. What Max did defies logic and explains it perfectly. And it does defy logic. It's histrionic and it's, I don't know, is it juvenile? Is it? I said, actually, I regret it now because I said this is sort of former Ford 1600 stuff. But is it? Actually, if you look at the behaviour of the drivers in the Walter Hayes Trophy and the Formula Ford Festival recently, they're actually pretty good compared with what Max was doing. Yeah, there was that ridiculous incident with Max Esterton, the other Max, when he got the penalty, a 4.5 second penalty, which just dropped him behind the guy that he was involved with the shunt. I've never seen that happen before, but anyway, that's what they did. And he was on the inside and and this guy passed him on the outside. It was trying to pass him on the outside, and Max ran a bit wide, and because he then pushed the other guy off from the boonies, he got the penalty. So that was about the only thing that happened. Apart from that, all the Formula Ford 1600 drivers were much more ethical, I think, than Max Verstappen. So you can't even say it's Formula Ford stuff. It is just defying logic stuff, actually. Solo P1 says, hi, Sir Windsor. Well, that's very kind. Thank you very much. I don't think that will ever happen. Although I think I might have mentioned it at some point. My mum tells me that my great uncle, I think he was an uncle, was once Lord Mayor of London. Wow. So there's another one saying Pigdily, saying huge fangirl moment. I'm not quite sure what that means, really. Dr. Windsor in the house, says Stampede. Yeah, I won't put that one up. But thank you very much. Speaking of which, there was the Doctor in the House movie with Dirk Bogarde on the other day. Love it. James Robertson Justice. Wonderful. And nobody does a better James Robertson Justice imitation than my friend Matt Bishop, or Kenneth Williams for that matter. In work meetings, but want to make sure you have the views. I'll be watching actively when able. That's from Lagrangian density. This is our aerodynamicist, Mega. Thank you very much indeed. Yeah, lovely to know you're listening, maybe with one ear, and if not both. Okay, here's another question. This is continuing on the Max theme, I think. I don't care, Max or Lewis. A professional racer shouldn't go to the race and have a mindset of hate and ready to target someone. I agree, 100%. And he obviously had, they're saying that some grudge he had over Monaco when Sergio deliberately shunted to prevent Max getting the pole. Give me a break. Do you think Sergio Perez, at this stage of his career, when he's been gifted this unbelievable race car, at Red Bull, an Adrian Newey race car that allows him to win Grand Prix again, do you think he's going to play around with one of Adrian's cars and crash it into the guardrail deliberately? Some people, and if Max thinks that, I don't know. I've said also in the YouTube, did I say it in the YouTube video or somewhere? I don't know. Maybe I didn't. But to me, what he did in Brazil was a little bit like some of the stuff he was doing at the back end of 2021, when it was pretty clear that if he was putting his car in a position where if he got hit by Lewis, they were both out, and it was to Max's benefit in the points. And that I traced that back to the sort of aggression of Joss and Helmut Marko, but then this year I've spent a lot of time saying, probably wasted now, saying how mature Max is and what a great guy he is, and he's the real Max Verstappen again. He's got away from all that stuff, and he's just the great karter who became the great Formula 3 driver, who became the great Formula 1 driver, and he's just got racing in his veins. And he's polite and he's civil and he's a responsible world champion who cares about his sport. And then Brazil comes along, and I have to sort of say, right, sorry, got all that wrong. It's so out of character from the way Max has been this year. That's another point, and I suppose that needs to be borne in mind. Maybe something did happen between Mexico and Brazil. What could have happened? They did a roadshow or something, didn't they? I think they did. They did something, and then Checo did all his stuff afterwards, but it wasn't as if he and Max were ever close to one another, so that wasn't an issue. And Checo is in no position to say, we should help me more. How was Max supposed to help him in Mexico where they finished? And so what could have happened, unless it's something unbelievably personal to do with personal life, in which case what's Max doing bringing it onto the racetrack in Adrian Newey's Formula 1 cars? That's the next question. So, I have to say, I try not to be irritated by anything in life because I think life's too short for that. But I do find it irritating to have this thing about, let's move on. We're all sorted now. We work together as a team. It's all this move on business without actually getting to the bottom of what is happening is actually unhealthy, because you're not moving on from a position of true understanding. And to repeat the point, Red Bull obviously had no idea about this incredible grudge that Max had going into Brazil. And that is pretty staggering, isn't it? Because you would imagine that this driver that they've given this opportunity to, they would have a great relationship with him, and almost like a father figure relationship with him, and he would be open with him. If he was upset about something, why wouldn't he have spoken about it in a normal, traditional, double world champion who's just won everything and isn't he a lucky boy way? But he didn't. So here's another one. Justin PSU. We're not getting a lot of comments along the lines of my mate's massive Max fan, and it's interesting, that, isn't it? Because I know there are a lot of Max fans out there, and when you do a video and you're critical of somebody who's obviously a very important figure in motorsport, I always wonder, what do other people think? But here we go. Look, it's an absolute example of being ungrateful. He's unwilling to believe that the stuff Checo did actually helped him. He wants to think it was all him, and he doesn't owe him anything. Well, and there's my friend who's going to remain nameless, but he's a massive Max fan, has been for Toro Rosso days onwards, and he's saying, oh well, from Max's point of view, he would probably prefer Checo not to finish second because it makes Max's championship look better. That's just his opinion, obviously. I mean, I'm sure Max would never say that. I'm sure Red Bull would be shocked to even think that, but that somebody thinks that way. But here's somebody else saying, he's probably quite annoyed that people, presumably people like me and many others, hundreds of others, thousands probably, have been saying Checo's done a really good job this year and he is the dream teammate. But even if that was the case, the thing is, when a very, very fast number one driver is confronted by the spectre of their driving not looking as good as it should because the number two isn't that quick, they usually counter by pointing out lots of ways that the number two driver is really quick and they've done a great job to blow him away. That's usually what they do. And that's you. So if Max was in reality thinking, I'm really annoyed about this, even though I've won my second world championship and Red Bull have given me an amazing car, I'm really grumpy because a lot of people are giving Checo lots of credit. And I don't like the way he was waving that Mexican flag after the race, or whatever he's supposedly thinking. I'm sure he wasn't thinking that, but let's say he's thinking that. His way to counter that would be to make Checo look pretty good, because then it enhances Max's achievement, does it not? Rather than to just treat Checo like, a piece of dirt. So I get where you're coming from, Justin LPSU, but bottom line is, it doesn't actually make sense, does it? Nothing makes sense. I keep saying it. Are we living in the Twilight Zone or something? I think it's... So here we go. Here's another one. This is from Pine XD. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong here, Pine, you are Dutch, right? I think Max is a good driver, but not a good champion. Lewis sets more of an example as leader of the sport. Sure, Max is young, but he seems very influenced by the people around him. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I've been saying, isn't it? I think you've probably said it better than I. And isn't that a worry? Isn't it a worry that a young driver who's had zero issues really throughout his Formula One career, compared with a lot of guys who had to fight very hard finally to get into a competitive car, he's basically known what he's going to be doing right from the start of his Grand Prix career. Obviously had to deliver in order to sustain that, but nonetheless he's had great team and great cars to drive. Generally speaking, obviously years when he didn't have a race-winning car, but he's always known that he's always known what he's going to be doing on a Monday morning, which is always a nice thing. And because of that, you would imagine he would have had more capacity to have grown as a leader of people and a representative of his sport, well beyond the mere title of being world champion and the accolade of having more points than anybody else. It does bring a responsibility. And I've said this before, and I said it in a live stream. Think Graham Hill and what it meant for Graham Hill to be a world champion. What it meant was a massive amount of extra charity work and promotional work for the sport, road safety, all sorts of stuff, going back to the 60s when That was not, nobody asked him to do that. That was what he knew was his duty as world champion. He took on a responsibility at that moment. And I wonder whether Max feels that he's got a responsibility to the sport as world champion, or whether he just thinks it's a selfish accolade that he, belongs exclusively to him. And if that's the case, then I think the people around him are guilty of not having, educated him in that area well enough. And is that, we know the people around him, and I'm not going to get personal about it, but let's get back to Christian, because Christian's a good guy. I believe he's a really good guy and a good manager, and I think he understands racing and he understands people. And if Max has got that much out of control, I find that really surprising that it's happened, because how has Christian let that happen? You think he would have learnt from the Vettel-Weber situation and moved on to managing Max. But here we are. This is worse, I think, than anything we saw with Weber-Vettel. And this is not only was it completely ignoring a team order, but it was also showing massive disrespect to his teammate. Massive. And that's, that is terrible. So here's another one. This is an interesting one, I think. Let's have a look. Analyze this comment from DRKSN SKNJ Teddy Bear. I've never been a fan of Max's character. Honestly, not a fan of most drivers' characters. So what Max didn't surprise me. Well, I suppose that's one way of, of living with the situation. And I kind of agree with you. I've lost count of the number of. It's a bit sad to have to say this, really. I've lost count of the number of racing drivers that I've been friendly with at various stages of their career. And then we've kind of drifted apart, not because of the normal drifting that takes place in human life, but because they've gone on to earn a lot of money and be very famous, and they've changed. And I suppose you could be cynical. A mate of mine, not the Max mate, another mate, said, it's a mistake to become friends with racing drivers because they're all basically really selfish, difficult people. And and he's probably right, and it's sad, isn't it? It's sad. I wonder whether, my closest relationship, my longest standing relationship with a racing driver is with Nigel Mansell. And yeah, I've had my ups and downs with Nigel. But the thing about Nigel is that he taught me that reading the character of a racing driver is actually not that difficult. You kind of know what he's going to do. And he's like that because he is a racing driver. And once you've established that in your brain, you can then become friends with this new person that you now understand. And that's how my relationship is with Nigel. I know he's a difficult guy sometimes, but I also really appreciate A, why he's difficult, and B, a lot of his other qualities. And I assume that people who know Max really well have the same sort of relationship. But they all seem to be, this obviously Teddy Bear, Jeddy Bear, Eddie Bear isn't surprised, but I think a lot of people are surprised. I think a lot of people are. Okay, let's have a look at this one. This is Besmir Marku. Yeah, we've talked about the proximity of your name to that of Helmut, but I'm sure there's nothing other than just sheer coincidence there. Hi, Peter. I think Max and Checo's relationship is not going well for quite a while. Really? No matter what was the reason, I think Max did not a favour to himself by acting like that. Really, I'm astonished. You may well be right. And in a way, obviously, Max wouldn't have done what he did had the relationship been... Well, he wouldn't have done what he did if the relationship was right. The question is when it went wrong. Was it Monaco or was it something after Mexico? And but I never got that impression. But then you wouldn't necessarily, from the outside-ish, looking in, get that impression anyway, would you? Because you just see them do what they do. And but, if you think it's been going badly for a long time, for a while anyway, then again, you got to ask how much time would it take before Christian Horner saw that there was something not right with his two drivers. Let's face it, the two most, personal life aside, you'd imagine with Christian Horner, the two most important people. Well, no, the most important person in his life is Adrian Newey, for sure. But then probably Helmut Marko, because that's the Red Bull thing. But then the next two most important people are Max Verstappen and Sergio Perez. So he presumably spends a lot of time with them, knows them intimately, talks to them every day. And for him not to have twigged that there was some issue between the two of them that goes back for quite a while is, again, completely extraordinary. Why wouldn't he have picked that up and done something about it? Anyway, Lagrangian density actually sums up everything I feel about this race and this week. It's been a strange week for those of us who love the sport. A good week, a bad week, an unexpected week. Yeah, that's what I tried to say in the YouTube video yesterday. It was just these two incredible emotions, that of George, the first-time winner, and then Max doing what he did to Perez. Those two human things sums up the week, the race, the weekend. And sadly, as you say, it's a very odd thing. It's a very weird feeling, actually, because it's the end of the year. Max has won his championship. Everything should be fun and games and laughter and happiness and reflection on how brilliant the year has been. And this has completely soured it, for me anyway. It soured it because of the way it soured it for Perez. And what it's done in terms of that disrespect. It's that disrespect that soured it for me. George's emotion, Charles' brilliance in difficult situations, Carlos Sainz battling on, Lewis, the amazing year that he's had as well, emotionally and physically. But all that kind of now is taking second place to what happened between Max and... Well, it didn't happen between Max and Perez. It's just what Max did to Perez. Perez did nothing wrong. Nothing. And again, here's another point. I mean, it is. I talked about the little grey cells and Poirot. Let's analyse this, because if there was some grudge between Max and Perez, you'd have... And even if Christian Horner didn't know about it, even if it's been going on for a while, you'd have to assume that Perez would know about it, would you not? Because presumably at some point Max must have said to him, well, you did this and I don't like it, and one day I'm going to get you back for it, or something juvenile like that. And so, and either that was said 3 months ago and then forgotten, and then suddenly it happened, that Brazil happened and Perez was completely shocked, or it happened 3 or 4 days ago and Perez knew exactly what Max was on about. But why then, at the end of the race, did Perez say, well, now we know what sort of guy he is? What does that mean? Does that mean that the team also knew, actually, what this whole grudge match was all about, and they'd told Max not to do anything about it, but he'd defied their instruction and nonetheless done it, not given the place back to Perez? Or does it mean that nobody knew anything, including Perez, and he was just saying, look, now we know what this guy's all about? In the same way that Webber used to say, there's more to Sebastian Vettel than meets the smile on the podium. You watch him throwing helmets around in the driver's changing room at the back of the garage. And we all thought, well, yeah, okay, Mark, maybe he's exaggerating a bit. Probably he wasn't. But, okay, here's Lub Toro saying, Senna let Gerhard by. 91 Japan. Yeah, he did. Yeah, he's not the first guy to have done that. And it's, but drivers have been given wins and races. I mean, obviously, Rubens gave Michael a win, didn't he? And what about Mika Salo giving Eddie Irvine that win in the German Grand Prix 99? I mean, actually, I was quite angry about that, because it was pretty clear that Mika was only going to drive that year for Ferrari while Michael was injured, and So, where was the downside really in him just staying there and winning that Grand Prix? At least he had a Grand Prix win to his credit, and in a Ferrari, and he'd beaten Irvine. But he played team orders and obeyed team orders and finished whatever he did. I don't know where. I guess he finished second. I can't even remember now. Irvine won the race, and and in the end, where's Mika Salo now? It's not as if he's still on a massive Ferrari retainer or something like that. What was that all about? And yet he did it. And if you put that, that was for a win, and here's Max not prepared to give P6 back. It still defies logic. I don't know how many times we have to say it. I don't know what we're not. I hope we're making some progress here. Let's go back to the little grey cells and let's think about that comment of Perez, because for Perez to say now we know what sort of guy he is suggests that he's perhaps also talked about this to somebody at some point, because if it was a complete shock to him and everybody in the team, I'm not sure he would have been as calm as that, or spoken as calmly as that, and as pointedly as that. I think he would have said, well, what is going on? Why didn't you tell him? Did his radio not working? There would have been a bit of that, wouldn't there? But it was, now we know it was as if there was something there that something there that everybody assumed Max had sorted out in his own mind and wasn't going to be acting upon. So let's have a look at this next question. This is from Stampede 251. About sportsmanship. I'm new to Formula One, but I don't think I can look up to anyone in Formula One more than I look up to Rafael Nadal in terms of sportsmanship and psychology. Formula One drivers seem overall more flawed. Am I wrong? Absolutely not wrong. The only thing I'd say is, what about Roger Federer? But Rafa, what a star. And congratulations to Rafa. I'm for sure you're watching this live stream, Rafa. Congratulations. Just become a dad, hasn't he? And so pleased. Always been slightly dubious about his penchant for Kia cars. Nothing wrong with Kia, but you'd imagine he'd be a bit more upmarket than that, wouldn't you? But anyway, putting that to one side, Rafa just superb and emotional and sweet and kind and charming. And racing drivers are like that. There are some who are like that, and obviously Max comes from the school of hard knocks for sure. And I don't think Helmut Marko's presence has. I don't think that's in any way softened his way he thinks and the way he acts. And his father's a tough nut as well. A really tough nut. So. I think what does Max think when he sees Rafa Nadal and the way he is, or Roger Federer for that matter, or maybe some of the golfers as well? Some of those guys are brilliant as well, and a lot of what they do is all to do with sportsmanship. And think about it in golf. You can be absolutely on your own if you've got an early tee time. On a Thursday, it can be 6:24 a.m. and the grass can be a little bit dewy, and the ball is off the side of the green, and you walk up to the ball and you tread an inch a little bit too close to the ball, and the ball moves a millimeter, and nobody's seen it except you. Do you then ring the referee and say, I've moved the ball, I need a penalty stroke, or do you just carry on? Well, I can tell you now, I would think 99% of all professional golfers ring the referee and give themselves a penalty. And so, that is I think that's the difference in golf, certainly, and in tennis to some extent, where you grow up making the calls for your opponent because you don't have an umpire or whatever. That was in, that was out. It's a question of being honest. And I think in racing it's different because the guy you want to beat most of all is your teammate, for a start. He's the guy you hate, really. And beyond that, I think you've got a lot of other things you can always blame if you want an excuse for not being quick. A lot. And so I think that's what makes it very confusing and messy, Stampede, in motor racing. But there are some very good people. Don't despair. There are some very, very good people. And I've been going on about how dignified I think Lewis Hamilton was in defeat, and he was a defeat for him. Yeah, he got beaten by his teammate, and I think that should be remembered as well, because that was outstanding to me, and that was a 7 times world champion acting with the dignity of a 7 times world champion, indeed with the dignity of a Rafael or a Roger Federer. Quixotic 010 says, I'm sure people higher up in the team have given Max the impression that he is irreplaceable. It's sad. I'm not sure why anyone has ever said he was a cool head. Remember when he tried to fight Ocon? It's the privilege of his upbringing. Yeah, you're saying it, Quixotic, and not I. I try not to get too personal in any of this, but he does come from the school of hard knocks. There's no question. By which I mean tough people around him, and they probably feel. I just think he feels. Well, are we thinking that he's annoyed? Do we really think this is the issue? That he's really annoyed that people think that Perez isn't very good, and that's why he's won all these races, and it's annoying him, and Perez needs to be taught a lesson or something? Is that what he's thinking? It's hard to imagine. I mean, the more I think about it, trying to keep the grey cells going, is that it must be something quite personal between the two, I would think. I can't imagine that it would be this thing at Monaco. I mean, that is just so stupid. That if that was the case, and Max genuinely thought Perez had genuinely, deliberately shunted his car in qualifying, if Max thought that, then absolutely for sure Marco would know that, and Christian Horner would know that. And if those two knew it, and Adrian obviously, and if those three knew it, we would have heard something about it by now, for sure. So, and I just don't think he would have done it anyway. As I say, for Sergio Perez to put his whole career into jeopardy by deliberately crashing one of Adrian Newey's cars, give me a break. He just wouldn't do that. So here's Nutella Bra saying, yeah, that's just Dutch style. People are acting like they forgot that's how Dutch people are. They're straight up sometimes. Well, yeah, you're not being critical of the Dutch there. I think you're just saying they're straight up. Yeah, I don't know. I know some Dutch people who are incredibly shy and charming and polite. So I don't know. I can't generalize about a nationality like that. I think it's quite difficult to do. But Senza123 just says pretty childish. PainXD's just got a gifted sub and wants to thank very much for that. Thank you. Now, Nutella Bra is making a good point here. It's making the point that my Max mate made, which is that nobody actually knows what went on behind closed doors. So it's all just inference. Well, I think the point is nothing did go on behind closed doors. Isn't that the point? Because if something had gone on behind closed doors before Brazil, in theory, the management team should have been good enough to stop it happening. So what you're saying is, well, again, if there's a personal grudge between Max and Checo, which they both agreed to keep behind closed doors, how is it that Checo, knowing that, didn't go to Christian Horner and say, look, this is getting out of control. He's now saying that he's not going to obey team orders if I give him position. I mean, it just still doesn't make sense to me to say, oh, well, it was behind closed doors, and Max saying it's all behind closed doors and it's all okay now. But none of that makes sense to me. It doesn't make anything logical. Yeah, it's normally I've been quite good at hovering over the question to stop the thing moving, but for some reason I know what happened then. Actually, it does hover, but then if between clicking on the question to bring it up on the screen and hovering, if the chat then moves, I've lost everything again. So just trying to get back to where we were, because as we know, this is not the normal chat, because people love to just have chat and it goes up and down, blah, blah, blah. But in my case, I try to do everything in chronological order, trying to be a relatively logical person in an illogical week. Isn't it that? We've got some big questions coming up. Well, I got a lot of questions coming up. Where are we? I was saying, why did Max take in sixth place? We've got some really good questions. I can't wait to get to them. Wow. Greetings, Peter, my early morning. This is so ridiculous. Sorry. I know you don't like these silences because, but it'd be crazy for me not to get back to where we were because there's so many good questions. Okay, there we are. Finally got there. Unbelievable, isn't it? How long it's taken. Sorry about that. Pretty childish. Thank you for the gifted sub. Nobody knew what was going on behind closed doors. Checo and Max don't follow each other on Instagram. At least they didn't when I checked after the race. Well, I don't follow either on Instagram either. Not sure that means anything. I find Instagram incredibly complicated and annoying myself. That's just me. A bit like Facebook. Are not all Formula One drivers egomaniacs? Well, I don't think Peter Collins was he? Unbelievably quick driver, won some classic Grand Prix. I'm quite happy to give his car up to Fangio because he felt Fangio was the better driver. So, and he is a Formula One driver, okay, 1954, but at the end of the day, 56. But at the end of the day, no different. Human beings. And so, no, I don't think they are. I think there's a lot of people who are not egomaniacs. I don't think Charles Leclerc is an egomaniac. I think he believes in himself. I think he backs himself. But I don't think he's an egomaniac. I don't think Lewis Hamilton is an egomaniac. But I think there's a big difference between being egomaniac and somebody who believes in their own ability and backs themselves in any situation. And that's what a good athlete needs to do, quote Steve Waugh. But Nigel Mansell, he's not an egomaniac. He's got his ego is big, but then again, he's a well-rounded person who understands values of life and spends a lot of time thinking of others. I think that's what it's all about, isn't it? So it's thinking of others and putting your place in somebody else's place and wanting the best for them. That's maybe rare, but I'm not sure it is. I think, Peter Collins, I keep coming back to it. Jim Clark. You think Jim Clark, why did Jim Clark celebrate Graham Hill's win after the 66 Indianapolis 500 when Jim Clark, knew that he'd won that race and they just got the lap scoring wrong? Why did he do that? Because he was happy for Graham. And Jim Clark, one of the greatest Grand Prix drivers of all time, doing it because he's happy for another driver, his teammate. Egomaniac? Not at all. So, yeah, he wasn't. So let's talk about, Natella's talking about, I think you're talking about the incident. It was also in the heat of the race where he was upset about Hamilton's contact. So he just lashed out in the heat of the moment, not at all related to Checo. Yeah, okay, all right. Suspicious Pixel says, well said, Peter. Thank you very much. As you read those words from Max, what comes to mind is Checo is a legend where he won last year because of Checo's help installing Lewis. Well, exactly right, and that's and when confronted with that point, Max always said, "Oh yeah, I know I owe him a lot. He's been a great teammate, but now we're okay, and I'm going to help him in Abu Dhabi." Well, you brought a childish grudge into a Grand Prix called the Brazilian Grand Prix, and you exercise that grudge by A, disobeying team orders, and B, disrespecting your teammate, this guy that's helped you. Why didn't you settle the grudge in some other way? There are plenty of ways of settling grudges, Max, without doing what you did on a racetrack. And that's, I think, the real point. Why did he bring it onto the racetrack? And I'm sure that's what Red Bull are annoyed about. And as one of the previous comments said, Max is in an incredibly strong position at Red Bull. And because he, in effect now, he's so close to Helmut Marko, and with the very sad passing of Dietrich, that relationship is critical to the future of the team, isn't it? Christian's team. So, it's very difficult for Christian, for Red Bull, for Christian and the others in the management team, apart from Helmut Marko, to in any way sanction Max and say this is just not on. Get your act together, or you're out, or whatever they want to say, or we're going to fine you, because he's too important to them. And that's, as somebody said, he is perhaps too powerful now. That's an interesting point. And I wouldn't have made that. I'm shocked to hear myself making that point, because I thought 2 weeks ago it would never have occurred to me that this situation could be happening. And because I felt Max was a real player, very well balanced, and bearing the responsibility of being a world champion incredibly well, with style and with dignity. But, it doesn't seem to be the case now. So Langringen is talking about, I think, having gifted that thing, and he's saying more folks can enjoy Formula One fulfillingly in this community. Bring them on in. Good stuff. Thank you very much. Here's another point. Yeah, good. All these examples coming up. The stark contrast between that moment with Max and Checo in Brazil 2022, Lewis giving back Valtteri P3 in the Hungarian Grand Prix in 2017, I think. Yeah, well done, Shanery. Yeah, absolutely. Stark contrast. Michael Schumacher never gave anything to his teammates. Now, let's think about that. Yeah, I think that's probably right. And don't forget, his teammate was Jos Verstappen for a while, so maybe it all started there. Did Michael ever do anything to help Rubens? Or I think that's. I tell you what, that is untrue. Michael and Massa will agree with this. One of the reasons Michael retired from Ferrari when he did is because he knew they'd signed Kimi, and he was very, very fond of Felipe. And one of the factors, not all of them, but one of the factors in stepping down was to ensure that Felipe kept his drive. And I think that's a very good example. Michael actually really likes Felipe, and Felipe knows that. He had an incredibly close relationship with Michael. So I think, maybe not on track. You're right. I can't think of Michael sort of waving anybody past, but in another way, Michael did a lot to help Felipe and his career. So here's a question. Doughboy's trying to get the grey cells going again. Could it have something to do with Perez's contract? In the sense that there's something in the contract that Max doesn't like and doesn't think Perez should have? Too much money, for example? Or is it saying perhaps in Perez's contract it says he must always give position to Max, but can't always assume he's going to get the position back? No, it wouldn't be that, would it? Something in Max's contract would be more likely, possibly saying you never at any stage have to give a position away, even if instructed by the team. Again, difficult to imagine that would be in a contract, isn't it? Mind you, if the contract's written by Red Bull, I suppose anything's possible. But I don't know. To me, this isn't a contract thing. This is more a grudge thing, because Max is basically saying the slate's now clean and we're getting back to normal, and I'm going to help my mate Perez in Abu Dhabi. Of course I am. He's a great guy and he's ready to help me. I've wiped the slate clean and all that stuff's done with now. It's basically saying that. A bit like The Sopranos, isn't it? So, I don't know. Wow, here's a nice one. I'm not quite sure. Hello from the home of Nigel Mansell and Derek Warwick. I think you're meaning Jersey there, I imagine? Or because I right now Nigel lives in Florida and Derek I think lives in one of the islands still, but not Jersey. I think saw Derek in Singapore. I said, Derek, love to have you on the show. Can we interview you? And he said, yeah, you've asked me that before. And I've said yes before. Do it. So here I am, not doing it. I'll get round to it. Sorry about all that, folk, but I will. A great guy, Derek. Got a lot of time for him. He's an example, I think, of a selfless driver and a nice, well-rounded person. And look at the kick in the teeth he got. Well, it was a bit of a compliment, really, wasn't it? Because there he was going to race for Lotus in 85. And who arrives but Ayrton Senna saying, I don't want Derek Warwick in the other car. He's too quick. And so Derek loses his drive. So it's been going on for a long time. And Derek then went to Renault. And, so there we go. But he had to live with that, and he did. And he put on a brave face. Good job. J Starship. I think we're coming. This could be a Pro Max comment. Let's have a look. See what's happening here. Let's put this into perspective. Why would a team admit to the media that they knew their driver intentionally crashed? Wouldn't that look bad on the team? Well, of course it would. Yeah, of course they would. But what I'm saying is, if he did intentionally crash, as distinct from go down the escape road at Mirabeau like Nico Rosberg, if he did intentionally crash, and people in the team knew that or suspected that, that somehow would have got to the FIA, and somehow they would have looked at telemetry and they would have got on top of that. But much more importantly, I don't believe Sergio Perez is so stupid that he would do that in this team that he loves, that's given him this career reboot, in this most amazing of racing cars. And I just don't think he would have done it. So yeah, Michael let Rubens by in 2002. Yeah, it was all he did, and he did. Yeah, absolutely right. I forgot about that. Yeah, well, that was all. Yeah, and Michael was a fair guy. Tough, unbelievably tough, but fair. And he cared about others. And he loved racing. And he loves racing, and he cares about others. And yeah, I don't think he's a good example at all in terms of what Max is doing. Imagine Michael in that situation, in that Red Bull that Max was in Brazil, in that situation. Would Michael have said, no, I'm not going to let Perez finish P6? I just don't think he would have. I don't think any other driver would have. I think anybody would have let him take the position. So, and this is another one. This is an interesting point. I wonder if any sponsors will be having second thoughts about Red Bull after the budget cap saga and now this. Yeah, I mean, after the budget cap saga, I think they could come up with enough good explanations and arguments to say, yeah, let's move on. But having to say, let's move on again now, aren't they? That's a very good point. Thank you very much, Dookie Wookie. A lot of the Red Bull sponsors, I'm only guessing here, I'm not saying it for fact, but just intuition tells me that a lot of them are there because they generate business away from Formula One with Red Bull in some form or another. And I think a lot of them come that way. So I don't think you're going to see a mass walkout because they need the business. Having said that, I don't think saying let's move on actually is sufficient at this point, because how can you move on? Sergio Perez at the moment obviously wants help from Max in Abu Dhabi if he can have it, i.e. win the race. Not sure he cares about finishing second at all. I mean, the championship is important, I think, and I think it'd be nice for Sergio after everything happened in Brazil if he is second in the championship, which I'm pretty sure he will be. But I think it'll be once Abu Dhabi's over, I can't imagine Sergio Perez is going to go home to Mexico or where he goes on holiday and he's going to think, oh, I'm so glad all that's over. All that stuff in Brazil when Max was just ridiculous. I'm so glad that we've now put that to bed and we're all friends again and everything's wonderful. I just can't imagine he's going to think that way. Why would he? Yeah, all he's going to think is bring on 23, isn't he? It's Matt Adams, New York, just for information. Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much. One of my favorite cities. Love New York. Mind you, I just had a nice email from one of my mates, Steve Roby, who a very good mechanic in the 70s in Formula One. I got to read it to you because this is just for a change of pace. He said, I saw it and just had Brazil was the title of the email, and I thought it was going to be, what he thought about the whole Max thing or George or whatever or Mercedes fan. He said, hard to get my head around the fact that we've attended the very first Brazilian Grand Prix, and that was 50 years ago. Remember the water cannon on the crowds? I do. It was so hot that the fire crews was just spraying the crowd with water with the water cannon. And remember the rum and cokes on the front veranda of the Hilton, where we traded decals for ice and ice for the drinks. I do remember that as well. Yeah, that was the Hilton downtown as well. There wasn't one near the track. What I remember most was that a few of us went to the movies to watch Airport or Airplane or whatever it was called, the comedy with Leslie Nielsen. And it occurred to us that we didn't know if the movie would have Portuguese or English audio. As it happened, it was English with Portuguese subtitles. So a few of the Formula One guys got the jokes, but I think the locals were a little bit lost. Hope you're well. We just returned from New Zealand. Nice place, blah, 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 blah. So anyway, yeah, nice to have that reminder of those days in Brazil when we first went there. And of course, the first Brazilian Grand Prix was actually held in Brasilia, a non-championship race. And it was won by Carlos Reutemann. Yeah. Wow. Anyway, let's move on. Wow. Hello from Haiti. This is brilliant. Hello, Haiti. Love your knowledge. Love your knowledge and balance. Thank you. Always awaiting your analysis on YouTube and now on Twitch. Sorry, I didn't know it was one of those self-congratulatory things. So, but anyway, I just wanted to put it out there because it's from Haiti. It just shows what a wonderful world in which we live, that we can do a show and whatever it is now, 10:30 in the UK, and it's being watched in Haiti. I hope it's still good. Is everybody impressed now with the internet and the sound? All the hard times I've had from you guys. Look at it. Perfect Wi-Fi, perfect sound. A little bit like Mercedes. Where have you been all year, So here's someone who says, yeah, let's move on. Absolutely, he says. Let's have a look. This is from Pizza in Retirement. Pizza in Retirement. That's a man after my own heart, I think. I cooked a pizza yesterday. My wife was away, so I was doing the cooking, and I haven't done any cooking for a long time. I used to use my stove and oven for storage for electrical components, computers and things. When Alan Gow saw it once, he just went ballistic. And so, anyway, my wife, of course, doesn't do any of that, and she uses it for its proper use. But I have no idea how to use an oven and hadn't really thought about it for a long time. But I actually managed to get a pizza done for young Jack yesterday. How about that? Anyway, moving on, Pizza in Retirement. I think they will both move on. Perez is going to be dropped if he doesn't help Max next year. Max demonstrated his point, even in a questionable manner. But what point? What point? What point? I mean, that is the thing. What point did he demonstrate? That he's just an untrustworthy, difficult person with no ethics? Is that what we're saying? Is that the point? Oh, well, now we know that. That's okay. Perez is going to be dropped if he doesn't help Max. I mean, let's face it. The number of times Perez actually has had to help Max physically on the racetrack by blocking or doing stuff. You can't do much of that these days. Maybe one corner, you can be a little bit slow mid-corner and make it a bit difficult to take the guys to come out of the throttle and he loses a bit of ground to Max. Or you can do a bit of that, or you can... Well, what else can you do? You can hold up Max, but you can't do that for very long either, because the whole GPS thing and Formula One and, so all he can do in being the perfect teammate, it's not a question of helping Max in position changes or holding up other drivers. What being a great teammate for Max means is being what Sergio Perez is. Not quite as quick as Max on a regular basis, but quick enough to win at circuits like Monaco and Singapore in a really good car, do a perfect job, and when Max has some issues that day or whatever it is, and does a very good job behind the scenes at the factory, perhaps does quite a lot of sponsorship work, does quite a lot of simulator work, does a lot of stuff that carries the burden of work behind the scenes, the perfect teammate, doesn't complain, smiles a lot, easy to get on with. That is the driver you want. You don't want a guy who's actually super, super quick that you've got to keep your eye on all the time and wonder about whether he's doing anything behind your back. I don't believe there would have been any of that issue between Max and Perez, because Perez isn't quick enough for Max to have to worry about. That's the whole point of this. He is the perfect teammate, not because he's always letting Max pass. Max is usually in front of him anyway, so it's not even an issue. Yes, Abu Dhabi last year, he did hold up Lewis, but that was one race in, I don't know how many last year, 20 races. Maybe there was a couple of other occasions, but that isn't the real point. The point is he's just a comfortable guy for somebody as quick and as good as Max Verstappen to have alongside him. That is the point. So, what could Perez do next year that would cause him to be dropped from the team? Crash the car deliberately? Yep, maybe. That would annoy them intensely. If he was deliberately holding up Max, the FIA would be on it straight away, and they'd be doing one of their penalty things, wouldn't they? It wouldn't be the team. And maybe the team would say, oh, well, that was horrendous, we're going to drop him. But I don't think they would, because how many races are there where that situation would arise anyway, out of 23 races? Not many. It's more just being Perez and doing what he does. And Perez loves being at Red Bull. He's in a race-winning car. Why wouldn't he? He's doing all the things that Daniel Ricciardo could have been doing. And, there we go. So... there's a big discussion going on about Indianapolis, and that was an accident. Michael was supposed to win Indy. Yeah, but, he kind of knew Rubens was not going to be that easy, didn't he, that day, I think. It was a bit of a silly race there, wasn't it, the whole thing? So here's another one. Sorry to sidetrack. No worries at all. But with all the talks of number 2, do you see Toto having another 1-2 issue between Hamilton and Russell, another Senna Prost? I do, absolutely, and I've been saying that ever since Mercedes signed George Russell. And again, this is not disrespect to George. It's the opposite. It's total respect for George and how good he is. That the one thing you don't need if you're Lewis Hamilton is a guy as good as George in the other car, because it's almost an insoluble problem, as we're seeing. We saw it with Christian Horner unable to sort it with Webber and Vettel, and now he's obviously unable to have seen what was happening between Max and Perez, would you believe? Even though Perez isn't, a great Grand Prix driver, he's a very, very good Grand Prix driver. And we saw it with Ron, obviously couldn't control Senna and Prost, and we saw it with Ron, couldn't control Fernando and Lewis, could he? And Williams couldn't control Reutemann and Jones. And so it goes on. And I think it's going to be the worst nightmare ever for Mercedes if they've got a great car and a real chance to win the championship. That fight between Lewis and George, it scares me, actually, just thinking about it. I just hope nobody gets hurt. That's all I can say. I really, really do, because that is absolutely playing with fire, I think. If you've got a great Grand Prix car and you've got Lewis Hamilton, in my view, you don't put George Russell alongside him. You put a Perez or a Bottas alongside him. And if you've got George Russell, you don't have Lewis Hamilton alongside him. You put a Perez or a Bottas alongside him, but you don't put George with Lewis. And you don't put, I don't think really, you put, I think you give George the status that he deserves. He's quick enough to be a number one. And I don't know. If I was McLaren, I wouldn't be replacing Daniel Ricciardo with Oscar Piastri. He's presumably quicker than Daniel now, and he might give Lando a hard time. And if that happens, I don't think he'll get the best from Lando. I think this whole thing of putting the driver, if he's a really, really good, great Grand Prix driver, putting him under pressure to get the best from him is complete nonsense. I've never known a great Grand Prix driver who responds to pressure from a teammate. It brings out the worst in them usually, in terms of either mistakes, or they get emotionally unstable, or they get stressed, or whatever it is. It doesn't bring out the best in them. And that's why Ayrton Senna didn't want Derek Warwick in the Lotus in 85. Simple as that. That's why Michael Schumacher didn't want Mika Häkkinen or Juan Pablo Montoya. He wanted Eddie Irvine. He wanted Rubens Barrichello. He wanted Felipe Massa. Guys that he knew would fit in and work with him. So yeah, you're absolutely right. I don't know, guess, because that is the next big thing. That drama is, it's all very well for Lewis to have all this dignity now, but when it really comes down to it, if Lewis gets taken out, or Lewis takes George out, that could happen as well. First corner, some race somewhere, tyres not up to temperature, whatever, lock up. Bit like George at the American Grand Prix this year, into turn one. Imagine what'll happen then at Mercedes. So Senzes123 says it seems like Max waited for a race not to go his way to get his revenge. That's another one. The grey cell's ticking over again. So we're saying this revenge thing, revenge. Fish called Wanda, isn't it? This revenge thing is something that's been there for a long time, but he was only going to do it when it was an innocuous race and it was for P6. But what he did, revenge, I know you got it in inverted commas, revenge implies some sort of grudge. And if it's some sort of grudge, that is something that two professional Grand Prix drivers should sort out somewhere other than in a Grand Prix race at the expense of the team. Because what Max did was not a direct revenge hit on Sergio. It was actually a hit on the team as well. And that is the most worrying thing about this. He chose a revenge that involved hurting the team as well as Perez, which implies that the team have done something that have annoyed Max. And now it's all okay. Now we're moving forward. It's all behind closed doors. I was writing an article today about Ken Tyrrell. Imagine what Ken Tyrrell would make of this. He would be foaming at the mouth at the thought of a driver not doing what he was told to do in a situation like that, where you're talking about championship points and a driver who's already ceded position to the other guy anyway. Imagine what Ken would do. Talk about foam. It would just be bring out the umbrellas. So here's a question. There is a reason why Rubens disliked Michael after he left Ferrari. Well, I know Rubens really well, and I was there at every race, and I know exactly what happened there. Rubens didn't like Michael. Didn't dislike Michael. What he didn't like was all the Brazilian press saying to him all the time, but Rubens, you're number 2. When are you going to be able to be a number 1 and win races? And Michael's dominating this team. It's nothing personal against Michael. He just felt, wow, I'm as quick as Michael, and I should be in a team where I can be number 1, and I'm going to go to Williams and prove it. Instead of thinking, as I think Sergio Perez still thinks, hopefully, I'm unbelievably lucky to be with a team as good at Ferrari, and if I continue to just work like this, I can win 10, 15 Grand Prix, because Michael's not going to win them all, and there are going to be other issues, and some days I'm going to beat Michael anyway. That's what Daniel Ricciardo should have been thinking when he was, psyched out by Max Verstappen at Red Bull. Instead of thinking, I can make this work in some fashion, and I'm still better off in a great race team than I am going to a mid-range team as number 1, as Daniel did at Renault, as Rubens did at Williams. It never works. As Eddie Irvine did at Jaguar, it never works. And being with a great race team, even if you are a bit overshadowed by the other guy, is still better than going down to the midfield. And that's what annoyed Rubens. Because he's Brazilian, and he was so inundated with Brazilian press all the time saying, oh yeah, but Michael this and Michael that. It wasn't that he didn't like Michael and Michael did anything. It's just Michael did what he knew was the correct way to win world championships. Make sure he doesn't have a guy who's going to cramp his style in the other car. I don't blame him for that at all. It's what I would do if I was in Michael's position. So here's another one, Pond Feed. This may come back to haunt Max next year. if there is a genuine title fight. Well, it may well do. But more importantly, because I think the odds of Perez actually being in a situation to hurt Max are very small. As I've said, how many races are there actually when Perez has been in a position in terms of a place change or holding somebody up actually physically to help Max? It doesn't happen very often. And what will happen, though, is a breakdown in the relationship and the respect that Perez has, perhaps even for Max. And he will probably become closer to the team because he'll think, I love this team, and Max is the guy that started this and caused this rift. I'm just going to do my job. And he may actually become a better Grand Prix driver as a result, and maybe a bit quicker. And that's what, as I said right at the start of this live stream, that's the last thing Max Verstappen wants, is Sergio Perez doing any more of what he did at Monaco or Singapore this year. And it could happen. Sergio's got a lot of talent, particularly with the right foot on acceleration, as I keep saying. Traction, he's unbelievable. And he only needs a couple of other bits, and he really works hard over the winter, holidays with Adrian Newey in Cape Town, whatever he might do, and suddenly he isn't this sort of really comfortable number 2 sofa that Max has been lucky enough to have, I think, actually. But he might become somebody that's a bit more uncomfortable for Max. And that may be good for Red Bull, I suppose, in a way, but it's not what Max wants. And then Max will start wanting to get rid of him and replace him with somebody else then, I guess. And that'll be fractious. So okay, here's a good question. 60-year follower says, am I getting it to work? Yeah, here we go. Greetings again, Peter, from my early morning. No fatuous opinions around here. I'm just interested in your... Oh, I don't think those opinions... I don't think any of the opinions expressed tonight have been fatuous. Night, my time. Morning, your time. They've been fatuous. But anyway, I'm just interested in your views of tear-offs, practices, perils, and productive solutions. You mean tear-offs that are starting to litter the track and jamming brakes and radiators and everything? Yeah, I mean, you could argue that amongst all the other good things that Formula One is doing, maybe we should have a no litter policy. And I'm not quite sure. I mean, tear-offs are like windscreen wipers, aren't they? They're annoying and archaic, but if you don't have them, you're lost. And you can have the most expensive supercar in the world, but you still need to have this weird thing going across the windscreen like this, looking like it's something out of the Dark Ages. It's the same with a tear-off, isn't it, really? So I don't really know what to say about that. I suppose we have these... Excuse me. Give me a second to have a drink. Been going for quite a while, haven't we? Hour and 3/4. We have these cool lens cleaning things on cameras, go on onboards, don't we? So maybe that's something that we need to be thinking about. Maybe the helmet manufacturers need to be thinking about some sort of system. Formula One teams are very loath to start adding to all the electronic complexity on a car, and having some sort of visor cleaning system is not something that I think they would welcome, because it always means additional weight apart from anything else. And they've always been fairly negative about, for example, heated visors for exactly that reason. And it's something else to go wrong as well. So beyond that, I don't really know what the solution is. But thank you for raising the point. It's something that we need to mention, I think. So here we go. There's another question from A. Yassin. Peter, do you think Max cares about online opinion? Like at all? Because drivers can say they don't care about that stuff, but Max showed he truly does not care what people think of him online. The criticism is nothing. Yeah, I think you're right there. I don't think he cares. He probably doesn't read any of it. And he's so successful and he's so good at what he does. He's got too much other stuff he's doing on. Why would he sit around reading that stuff? And I to be honest with you, I think Lando, for example, does his thing, doesn't he? And he loves social media and uses it very well. But I'm not sure he interacts in a way, or would, if somebody said something negative about Lando on one of the platforms, would Lando give the guy a foghorn and reply, or the girl and reply? No, I don't think he would. And he likes social media for being proactive in terms of what he does on social media. And other drivers are the same. And but in Max's case, I don't think he reads online. I don't think he reads it at all. He doesn't need to. Not interested. I would think you're absolutely right. So Jay Starship's coming back because apparently I've misunderstood what he meant or she meant. Sorry, I should have explained. You said Perez would lose his seat if not helping Max, and Max let his point known. To me, that's a problem, that a driver is having control over the team when it shouldn't really be like that. I hope I explained that well. Okay, yeah, and I think we've made that point, haven't we, that Max quite clearly is in an incredibly strong position in the team. As strong as Michael was at Ferrari, for example, or Jackie Stewart was at Tyrrell, or Jim Clark was at Lotus. Well, not really Jimmy. I mean, Jimmy just sort of went along with what Colin wanted to do, I suppose. And in recent times, you would have thought Sebastian Vettel at Red Bull, but, you know, all things come to an end. But not this one. And he is in a very strong position. And but I think Perez is in a differently strong position, actually. I think he's probably very like Sergio Perez, liked by the team and by Red Bull. And I think you'd have to be a cretin not to think that Sergio Perez has done a great job for Red Bull this year as the perfect number 2 or wingman or whatever you want to say to Max Verstappen. He's been absolutely perfect, I think. I can't think of any driver in the history of the sport that's done as good a job in that role as Sergio Perez has done this year. Sanez123. I'm going to put this up because it's about my mum. Yeah, 101. Now the question is what to get her, because she's not actually, she's in a care home, but she still walks and she's still out there every day talking to the folk there and watching Formula One and watching tennis a lot on TV when she can get the internet to work. But her room's not that big, so I don't need to, I'm not going to give her a grand piano or something. So it might well be flowers, but even flowers take up a bit of time, a bit of space. Might be her favourite perfume, actually, which I've neglected to order. Probably won't be able to get now in time. So anyway, I'll be there. So here we go. There's another one. This is from Langering and Density. That's fulfilling. That's my key bit. I love the sport. I've always loved the sport. Spent 15 years in physics among Mech-E friends in Formula SAE. Wow. This community, I buy in here. Thank you very much. We get to appreciate the sport fully with Peter's insight. I know tech folks. I know marketing folks. I know a couple of drivers. Peter blends the understanding and appreciation and love of the sport like no one else. Oh, that's very kind. Thank you very much. As you can see, I read these as they come. Had I seen that, I have to say I probably wouldn't have put it up because it's very, it's very kind, but you shouldn't put it up. 101, another one from JT Mo 1. 101, awesome, brilliant, eh? Thank you. So here's another one about the Max thing. It's all, and we knew it would be Max, didn't we? I don't think Red Bull had no idea. Max said in the radio that he told them that he wouldn't do that. However, I still think Max is wrong, but we can't be in his head. Yeah, but Max said that, but then again, Red Bull said to Max after the race, why didn't you do what we told you? So, there's a conflict there, isn't there? That's a real conflict. And then we got the Perez comment, which kind of suggests what you say is correct. Now you know what kind of guy he is. So it looks like, and thank you for bringing this point, Besmir Malkia, it looks like there was some sort of discussion at some point, maybe in the distant past that some people had already forgotten within the team, in which Max said, this is what I'm going to do because I'm really annoyed about it and you can take it or leave it. And they said, well, Max, you're not going to do that. And, we trust you not to do that. and Perez saying quietly to somebody, Christian or whatever at Red Bull, don't trust Max because I know this guy, he probably will do that. Oh, don't worry, we make sure he doesn't Checo. And if that happened, all the comments that we heard kind of match up, don't they? Because that's Max saying, I told you I was going to do it. That's Red Bull saying, why did you do that? They've probably forgotten the whole conversation. And then there's Perez, who remembers it all, saying, yeah, I told you. That's what he was like. Maybe that's what it was. Question is what? And I come back to my other point. What is it that was so bad between those two that he had to do something as catastrophically appalling as that couldn't have been solved out of the race car? That is the real point. I don't think there's any doubt there was some sort of grudge, vendetta, whatever you want to call it. And maybe he chose a race when it wasn't going to have a lot of influence. But why did he do it in a race? Why did he do it in one of Adrian Newey's race cars? I mean, that is what I find absolutely appalling. Iconnell 625, that's incredible. Hopes and prayers to her. That's my mum. Thank you very much. 101 likes the one. Yeah. Yeah, Zari's just saying they wouldn't expect Max to read it because most of the stuff leads very quickly to rude and stupid comments and blah blah blah. I think Max ruined it for Lewis. Yeah, well, he did, didn't he? But happy for George. Yep, solo P1. You're right. Everyone is saying, why did Max do it only for sixth place? I think he waited so it was a proportional response. He didn't want the statement to come when all was on the line. Yeah, and again, I just make the point that if what you say is true, and it kind of makes sense, what you're suggesting, what you have to then accept, is that what he did, he was doing it to hurt the team as well as Max Verstappen. Proportional response to the team. Because what the team wanted Max to do was related to the World Championship of Constructors. It wasn't related to anything else. So Max's vendetta was paid, admittedly in proportional response, to hurt the team. That is what is so ridiculous. Because at the end of the day, Max Verstappen would not be world champion this year if he'd been driving for Mercedes or Ferrari. Because if he was in any of those teams, either Lewis or Charles Leclerc would have been in a Red Bull and they would have been world champion. So all I'm saying is the team, the car, as Enzo Ferrari always said throughout his career, it's 60% car, 40% driver. And for a driver to take a vendetta onto the racetrack and hurt the team in paying out that vendetta in a proportional response is absolutely disgusting, I think. Hatman says, hi Peter, how are you? I'm okay, thank you. I'm getting a bit knackered, to be honest. It's nearly 11 o'clock here, so I'm going to wind it up in about 10 minutes. Ponfed says, thoughts on the Max Lewis collision? Yeah, I thought, what do I think? I think Lewis should have known that Max was going to go around the outside. I mean, that was pretty normal. And I think Max should have known that Lewis wasn't going to just back off and give him the right-hander. So in that sense, you could say it was 6-1, half a dozen the other, racing accident. But then if Max hadn't been on the outside going in and therefore put his car in a position where he had to expect Lewis to back away, which was, much too big an ask, the accident wouldn't have happened. So I think in this occasion, on reflection, if I really think about it, having spoken about it enough, probably the penalty is appropriate, yeah. Because Max hadn't been there. But I mean, it's one of the first times, you could say, in recent history, that the guy on the outside actually got the penalty. Because it was because he went round the outside of the left-hander that he was in that position. I suppose that's quite a good thing. Danny Amado says, Lewis Hamilton is such a humble bloke. Well, that's, I'm going to put that up because a lot of people would totally disagree with that. And I'm so happy to see somebody say that. Not that I am, thank you very much, Danny. not that I am a Lewis fan or a Max hater. I've always rated Max. Anybody who knows my YouTube channel will know how much I rate Max and how much I've rated Lewis and Charles Leclerc. But I've always said Lewis is. What I've always said is, I have said he's humble, but I've also said he's very spiritual. And I said before, it's quite personal to talk about that. But when I used to do the live interviews with the drivers after the races and after qualifying, and this was very early on in Lewis's F1 career. We're talking 07, 08. And I remember a couple of times we always had this thing where I would mention his spiritual strength and his belief, and he was always very happy to talk about it. And I remember thinking, there aren't many racing drivers who are prepared to be that open about their belief. A lot of golfers are, it's a kind of almost a fashionable thing in golf, but not racing drivers. It's not the done thing, is it? But Lewis was able to do that at a very young age and to speak very well about his inner belief and strength. And yeah, I've always respected him a lot for that. Solo Pio wants this. Oh no, wants this to me, to you, not to me. But I respect your opinion. Okay, all right. So Syphilis says, I think there's a little posturing with Lewis, but the guy ultimately means well and seems like a genuinely good person. Yeah, I think you're right, and I think it's probably a good summation. I think the posturing is partly inevitable, isn't it? 7 world champions, globally known and recognised. He can, wherever he goes, he's going to see a billboard of himself at a Grand Prix weekend. I mean, it's almost impossible to disassociate yourself, I would imagine, from that person on the billboard as to who you really are, with your headset on and you're listening to your music and eating your sandwich and being a human being. Imagine how difficult that would be, actually. And you've won 7 world championships and you're out there racing Formula One still, hungry as a dog. I mean, it's a really difficult thing, actually, if you really think about it, to manage, to think about how he does that. And I think he's also asked a lot of very stupid questions a lot of the time, and I think because of that, people often see some responses that are probably not real responses from the real Lewis Hamilton. They're responses from a guy who's irritated that he's been asked this question 50 times already, and he's tried to express it in 50 different ways, and he's run out of steam or whatever it is. And you see that, and that's kind of understandable as well. There's too much of that, I think. Everybody wants the soundbite, and without really thinking through what they're seeing, without having to actually get the soundbite. And I think that possibly colours a lot of people's. I've got a friend, another mate, who makes a lot of comments about the Formula One drivers and forms opinions on them based on their body language and the way they speak when they're doing these soundbite interviews after practice in the race. And I keep telling him, I said, look, that's completely artificial. And usually the questions are relatively inane and go nowhere, and they're bored, and all they want to do is go and have a drink or a massage or whatever it is. And don't judge anybody on that. He says, oh yeah, but they are who they are. Well, I'm sorry. To me, that is not a litmus test at all. And I think the same applies to Lewis. I mean, if you see Lewis, and I haven't had that many great conversations with him. I've had quite a few, and they've always been away from all the rubbish. And he's just a normal guy who loves motor racing and driving and loves talking about it in a normal way. Very simple. Say what you like about George, says Langranian Density. He is a Grand Prix winner. Absolutely, yeah. There's no doubt about that. He's damned overdue. Is George the best? Is George exceptional? A deserved Grand Prix winner, definitely deserved. And I keep coming back to that time in Abu Dhabi, actually, when he was testing. He did FP1 for Force India, and then ran over to the Formula 3 paddock, GP3 paddock, qualified on the pole and won the GP3 race. I thought you weren't supposed to be able to mix all these different categories as well as that. But that's what George did. No, the guy's really good. Again, that's the reason Lewis didn't want him, just to make the point. Well, yeah, confirming what I was saying about, stand back in and run for cover if Mercedes do have a really quick car next year. And I think Harshall's kind of just repeating that point. If the Mercedes is quick enough to win the championship next year, given how much the team has achieved with Lewis, I can't imagine how they're going to handle George being so close to Lewis, if not quicker at times. And he will be quicker at times, maybe 50% of the time. Absolutely. So that is the issue, isn't it? And if they're that close, they're going to hit one another at some point. I mean, Nico and Lewis didn't they? So for sure, George and Lewis are. So Windsor, it meant to be for Lewis to win Abu Dhabi. It's come full circle. Okay, after last year, it's just meant to. Imagine if he does win. Imagine if they get to the 4 laps to go, and Nicholas Latifi crashes again in the Williams. Imagine that, and Lewis is leading at the time. Imagine. There would be something absurdly poetic. Yeah, it would be absurdly poetic. That would be right if that happened. Be magnificent, says Willow Creative. And no fan noise that I can hear. No noise. Oh, good. No fan noise. Okay, good. Thank you. Yeah, this mic's pretty good. This Rode mic. I think Rode's Australian, isn't it? Or not? Have I got it wrong? If they are, good job, mate. Yeah, beauty. Pizza in retirement is talking about if Perez would be more competitive, it would even out the power ratio between the actors. You can't make Verstappen slower. I don't know, but isn't it a normal phenomenon historically that the faster driver has more influence over a team? Oh yeah, absolutely. And that's why it's a perfect team, because Verstappen he's not the faster driver. He is a great racing driver. Very, very fast. There's nobody faster really on the planet, I wouldn't have thought. So if you got that, you just want a guy who's going to fit in the other car, as Rubens Barrichello for a while fitted in at Ferrari, as Felipe Massa did alongside Michael, and so on, as we've been saying. And he's the perfect guy because he's quick enough, as I say, to win Grand Prix in a Red Bull when things don't go perfectly for Max, and that's always going to be the case. He's never going to have a perfect weekend 100% of the time. But what you want is a guy who isn't going to give Max a hard time or distract him in any way from the job he's doing, but is capable of winning. And that's not easy. I mean, I guess Valtteri Bottas kind of played that role, not quite as effectively as Sergio Perez. I mean, where was he in Abu Dhabi last year, for example? But at the same time, he did a pretty good job. He was kind of there. Jason Murphy says, hi Peter, maybe you've already talked about this, but what on earth has happened to Daniel Ricciardo? Yeah, I'll put that one up. Well, I think, I was just talking about this temptation when you're starting to win races in a team like Red Bull or Ferrari or wherever it is, and then a guy quicker than you comes into the team or is in the team. And you get a lot of people saying, it could be family, could be close friends, could be just fans online, could be just the white noise out there, all saying, "Oh, you're really good. You don't deserve to be number 2. You're getting inferior equipment. Max Verstappen's got better this, better that. You should be out there number 1 in your own life and in control." And that's what happened to Daniel. He listened to all that, I guess, and I guess his ego got the better of him, and he thought, I need to be a number 1 somewhere. I'm not going to stand for Max Verstappen having better treatment. In fact, what was happening is that Max was actually doing a better job in quite a lot of areas. Not all areas, and had Daniel stayed at Red Bull, as I've said many times, I think he would have won more races than Perez has won, and he would be a pretty happy man, I think. But he went in order to become free of all that stuff. He got a lot more money as well, which is obviously attractive. But then his ability to be self-critical about his own driving then went down the toilet, basically. Because why would he need to be self-critical then? Because he's just in a midfield team. He's got lots of money. He is Daniel Ricciardo. He's a Grand Prix winner. What's he got to learn from Lando Norris or Carlos Sainz? Nothing. And so that's why he stagnated as a driver. And then I think there's another point, which is, it's one thing to go for the money and in a lesser team if you've won your world championship as say Jacques Villeneuve did. But if you do that before you've won your world championship, that's always going to eat away at you. It's going to eat away at you. Every time Sergio Perez is quick or wins a race, Daniel Ricciardo's thinking, I could have been in that car. Yeah, I've got all this money. Do I really want all this money? I could have won that race. And that, and that is the other point. I think it just demotivates you after a while, and it's become such a burden to carry as an athlete that you, as I say, A, you don't become self-critical, and B, you lose faith. That's what happened. Invicted 1995. I think he's actually being supercilious in this question, isn't he? He said, would you put Lewis and Max together in a team? Yeah, I'm glad you got a nice smile on your face, mate. Yeah, good laugh. Yeah, right. Would I? Carnage, is somebody saying. Rosberg, Hamilton. Be worse than Rosberg, Hamilton, because Max is definitely quicker than Nico Rosberg. Anyway, I think there's a lot more going on. I'm going to have to ask you folk to be a little bit patient, because I'll do another live stream in a day or two for sure. And if I haven't got to your question, please ask it again, because it's easier to do that than to sort of recycle. I think it is. And I'm kind of run out of steam here. So I've been in 2 hours, and as I said, done a lot of writing today as well. So there's some other stuff I was going to do, but haven't got around to it. And the time's flown. I knew it would, because it's brilliant doing this. I love it. But yeah, let's do another live stream in a day or two. I won't let you down, and we will have one. Not quite sure when it'll be. Maybe this hour, maybe not. So I will just finish by saying thank you very, very much, everyone, for taking part, for doing this. It's been a lot of fun and lots of cool questions and lots of very interesting opinions. And I've learned a lot, as you always do, really. So there we are. I'm going to press the thing called finish, which is the logo we have at the end. And that'll mean time for bed for me, I think. So thanks for watching. See you again soon.